This is Identity at the Center. If it has anything to do with IAM, this is the go-to podcast. Now your hosts, Jim McDonald and Jeff Steadman.
Welcome to the Identity at the Center podcast. I'm Jeff, and that's Jim. Hey, Jim.
Hey, Jeff. How are you?
Oh, not so bad yourself?
Good. I spent an hour on the phone this morning with an old friend of ours, episode 100. Do you remember who our guest was for episode 100?
Was that our friend Victor?
It was our friend Victor Barris,
Yep.
co-founder of Identity.
Yeah.
Hired the two of us into this identity consulting space. And,
it's his fault that this has happened. Let's put it that way.
It's all his fault.
He's a contributing factor.
But I also feel like he probably won't hear this because what I realized was that he hasn't been following, downloading every episode and listening. But I told him, how much the podcast has grown, how many people are listening worldwide, that we're getting voicemails, that we're getting messages from folks. It's been truly rewarding for both of us, I think. And also I mentioned about how we're doing these sponsor spotlight podcasts, and certainly we're not getting rich from it, but the idea that, we're able to bring in folks from companies, they sponsor the episode, and we're able to, talk to them about their solution. And I think what's great about that, it's kind of like an initial sales call. You get to kind of if you're a listener, you get to figure out okay, this is either something I want to learn more about or something that's not a fit for me. And I got enough information I can move on. Either way, I think you get value.
Yeah. I think I was thinking about this the other day, and I think you and I were talking. It's we need to have a standard, first three questions or something like that. Okay, who are you? What do you do? And what do you want? Right. Something like that. That kind of help drive awareness. And obviously, all of our sponsors are looking for different things out of it, but for the most part, it's just awareness. I think there's so many tools in this space. It's very difficult to keep up, and being able to, have folks on and actually get into a technology. It is kind of like having that first demo call or something like that, right? Where, maybe we take the brunt of it, Operation Human Shield. You don't have to give up an email address right away. They can kind of hear about the product and then get into it later if they like it. And we've been really fortunate. I think we've had some really cool, vendors come on and kind of talk about their solutions. We got some ones in the pipeline that are very cool as well. So it's good times.
Yeah. I kind of feel like part of my day job is anyway, learning about products. So when we do have a sponsor spotlight where, that solution is, that's every time it's something that I learn from it. I learn about their solution, and it becomes part of, our bag to walk around with.
Yeah. I like it. We'll keep you as long as we have fun, as long as people find value. I think the feedback has been overwhelmingly positive from the handful of people that I've actually polled in real life and say, hey, did you listen to that? What'd you think? What could we do better? Right. Gotten some ideas like that. So if I've asked you for feedback and you've answered, I do appreciate it. If you have feedback out there, hit us up on LinkedIn. So just send a note to Jim or I and let us know what you like or don't like, or use our website, wherever we need. But the whole point of it, right, is for it to be, one, valuable, and two, not really a commercial kind of environment, right? It's a conversation, but we're able to get a little more detail around stuff like that. And hopefully it's entertaining enough that people don't turn it off.
Yeah. I think the other way that I wind up doing my research about solutions that are out there is YouTube. I've been also watching a lot of YouTubes from conferences, YouTubes about products, and, now I've got YouTube Premium, so I don't have to watch any ads. It's fantastic. I love it. But it's not cheap. I think it's $19 a month.
But for what the value you get out of it, I feel like it's the best streaming service. I know you get YouTube for free, but yeah, no ads is great. And the music is just kind of a bonus on top of it. I already have 8 different music services. I don't need another one, but I watch YouTube enough where that's the one that's oh yeah, that's a no-brainer. Definitely going to keep that one.
Definitely worth it. I kind of had some fear of missing out on the Gartner conference in London this week, and watching the updates that I've been seeing on LinkedIn definitely missed out, but we're not going to be missing out on many of the U.S. conferences.
No, we got a bunch coming up, and fortunately, we have partnered with several of them. So we've got discount codes. So we've got things like Identiverse coming up. That's May 28th to 31st. That's at the Aria Resort and Casino in Las Vegas. It was there last year. It's an awesome location. We've got discount code. And if you use the code IDV24-IDAC25, I know, totally rolls right off the tongue. Get you 25% off of your registration. It stacks with early bird. So the sooner you use it, the better. Again, IDV24-IDAC25. You don't need to remember it. I mean, bonus points if you do, but it'll be in our show notes. So you can take a look there. And I actually got to put a couple banners up on our website to promote that too. I haven't done that yet. Maybe I'll get around to that this weekend, but that's one of them. So we've got Identiverse May 28th, 31st. Make sure you register, use the code. Let's see what else. You get CPE credits.
Book your room too.
Book your room. Yeah. You don't want to be that guy who has to like walk 2 miles in Vegas to like get to where you're going to be. You always stay at the hotel of the conference. That's the pro tip. Vegas is enough walking that you don't need to be, walking extra. You're going to be walking a plenty just going from your room in the Aria all the way to the back corner where the conference area is.
Yeah, that was always funny with Caesars. You could stay in Caesars, but you'd have to walk 2 miles. Fortunately, it was all indoors, but I mean, to get to the different rooms, it was not to be taken for granted. You couldn't leave your room and be in a session in 2 minutes. That's just not going to happen.
No, that's not happening. Not happening at all. That's Vegas for you, though. I like Vegas. I'm looking forward to it. We have another conference we're going to hit later this year, Identity Week America. Actually, the whole Identity Week series, whether you're going to Europe, which is in Amsterdam, June 11th and 12th, the one in America in Washington, D.C., that's the one Jim and you'll be at. That's September 11th and 12th. Or the one in Asia, which is in Singapore, October 22nd, 23rd, the code IDAC30 gets you 30% off. A lot easier to remember, so that's kind of cool. But again, we'll have a link in our show notes for people to check that out as well. But I was at that one last year. I hosted a panel. We had actually kind of an all-star panel that we talked things. And I think we're looking to do the same thing again this year. So I'll be hosting some sort of panel to be determined. And then we'll also be doing podcasty things. And of course, at both conferences we'll be doing podcasty things. But hopefully people take advantage of the discount codes. And yeah, book those hotel rooms early and often.
And our guest for today is somebody that I think we met at through the conference circuit a while back, and very glad to have him here with us tonight. And by the way, it is tonight. We're recording Friday at this point it's 7:38 p.m. on the East Coast. So love of the game, right?
Love of the game. I'm in a hotel in New York City, relatively close to Times Square. So it's kind of scene setting for you. I'm in a hotel room. I'm about 10 floors up. I don't know how peaceful this is going to sound for me on a recording standpoint, because it seems like there is an awful lot of activity with Times Square just outside the window. Sirens, people, noise, whatever it may be. I'll do my best to clean it up. But hey, just think of it as like, hey, you're on location and the exciting world of consulting travel and recording a podcast in your room on a Friday night in the hotel. Sounds exciting. Sounds thrilling, right? That's what everyone looks forward to. All right. Why don't we get to our guest? He's been patiently waiting in the wings. He's been with us before. His name is Paul Mezzera, identity enthusiast at large. Welcome back to the show, Paul.
I'm really glad to be back, guys. Very nice to be here.
Well, thanks for taking the time. I know it's a Friday night here for us on the East Coast. I think you're on the West Coast, so it's a little bit earlier for you. So we'll try to get you out so you can enjoy your weekend. The last time you were here with us was episode 190, and that was November of 2022. So roughly about a year and 3 months ago for us. We talked about identity governance. I'm not going to ask you to tell an origin story. If people want to find that out, go back, listen to episode 190. We'll be right here waiting to come back and pick it up from here. I guess what's new? What's been happening in the last, year and plus a few months?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. So I'll save people maybe from having to listen to my whole sob story from before. But yeah, I mean, originally, I'd been doing IAM for many, many years and then had a great time at Gartner. And then I was at, last time when we recorded, I was at Saviynt doing product and market strategy. And since then, I left Saviynt and started doing a bit of consulting with a company called Lionfish Advisors. And basically that was around having consulting and helping tech companies. So it was basically, providing some thought leadership and advisory to them. But then shortly after, I decided I got to go back to something a little more full time, and I joined University of California, Davis. And so I've been leading in identity access management, and actually I was leading a collaboration and messaging team. So all the electronic mail, storage, Google, Box, all the great stuff that everyone needs to do their job. So had several teams there that running a team of about 20 people. So you probably have seen some of the posts. I'm looking for some supervisors as well. So, so a lot of management kind of responsibilities, but kind of an exciting time over there as we're kind of modernizing our IAM platform there. So we'll get to chat about that a little later.
Yeah, the higher ed space is so fascinating, and definitely want to dive into that with you. As Jeff mentioned, we talked identity governance and administration last time you were on, but really what I wanted to hopefully pick your brain on a bit today is privileged access management. Keeps coming up in my day job. It feels like it's kind of where the industry at large is starting to say, okay, we're in a pretty decent position from single sign-on and MFA perspective. We've got our arms around, maybe we're mid deployment of governance, but privileged access management, we need to have a strategy. And the thing is, like, it's not like you can just easily go online and say, all right, I got it all figured out. So generally you need to bring in some expertise, some people who've worked with privileged access management. But I think the underlying to all that is that the space is rapidly evolving. And I'm wondering if you can kind of share, what do you think is driving this change, this evolution that's happening so quickly?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think back to kind of the beginning days of privileged access, maybe in the early 2000s. So we're dealing with a lot of on-prem infrastructure, right? So, and really trying to protect those crown jewels, which in most cases, when there's any kind of a compromise, that's really the end game, is to get a privileged account, right? So these are definitely the crown jewels of the organization. And through that, and through, a lot of different breaches and such, now CISOs are top of mind. I mean, we need a privileged access management strategy and solution in place, or maybe even in some cases can't even get cyber insurance unless you have privileged access management. So definitely the game is a higher game to play now with PAM. It's more critical. But I'd say what's changing it is, this move to the cloud, right? So when I was at Gartner, we talked about CIEM, which is the Cloud Infrastructure Entitlement Management. And that was about, how do you manage the thousands and maybe millions of entitlements that, say, AWS, exposes through their services. And there's just no humanly way possible to manage those. So back in the day, at the beginning of privileged access, maybe you had a, jump server, you had a Windows server, a Unix server, you had probably a manageable number of entitlements and people that you can manage. It was probably something you can, point and click and assign people and do that. But I think it's not possible any longer to do that. So we need some new solutions that'll automate a lot of that. And I think that's where the KIM kind of comes in, at least to at least give you visibility of what entitlements should or shouldn't be there. Of course, I don't see that as PAM, but it is privileged access management to some extent, because all those entitlements are privileged, right?
You're kind of sneaking into my next question with that last part, but first off, I have to ask you, so it's Kim or Keem, and on what authority do you make that distinction?
I had this debate with Enrique Teixeira, and he wanted to call it Cage, and we said, well, that sounds too much like some famous person. And so we said, well, Kim is the Cloud Infrastructure Entitlement Management. And we kind of dubbed it Kim, even though it's not kind of spelled that way, but that's how I've always, pronounced it. But
I think either way you go, you're going to sound like some famous person. So, okay. So I kind of started off with this like dialogue about how privileged access management is expanding. And I wanted to bounce a few different tools that are, probably all worthy of their own space. But I'm going to phrase the question like this. If you were, as a practitioner, which you are, we're putting together a PAM strategy, would these things be in your PAM strategy? Are they, and I'm only going to give you an option of yes or no. Okay.
Right.
So the first one is
that's going to be tough because I always like to say it depends, right? But okay, I'll try
I'll try my best. You can try and soften it, but I want a black and white to start. Okay. ITDR.
So that's part of your PAM strategy, right?
Right.
I would say yes to some extent. I'll explain why, but I'd say yes.
Okay, go ahead. Explain.
Oh, okay. Didn't know if you were going to just give me the
no. You can say yes or no, and then you can go right into it. That's cool.
Yeah, because I was thinking of ITDR, and actually the beginnings of ITDR is really about attacking the identity infrastructure, right? That's really what the ITDR was born out of. That it's like, unfortunately, I don't want to name specific vendors, but where they were attacked and they were able to mint SAML tokens and OAuth tokens, and basically you're attacking the identity infrastructure, right? So that's the identity threat detection and response. And to me, privileged access management tools have always done some element of this in terms of recognizing when either tokens, you have a golden ticket created in your Active Directory, things like that. So I would think any kind of a PAM privileged access strategy should include some sort of threat detection and response. So maybe not an ITDR, a separate tool, but some element of threat detection and response.
Jeff, do you want to weigh in on this? I mean, did Paul get it right?
Well, he gave the classic depends answer. So, as a consultant, I'm sitting here cheering like, yeah, it depends. Yeah. I mean, sure. Right. I think, why wouldn't your strategy include as many tools and options as you possibly could? Well, the answer is probably money. It's probably the reason why it's not there. But I feel like ITDR is definitely having a moment in the sun for the last couple of years now.
Mm-hmm.
I've talked about this before, and Paul, I don't know if you and I have talked about this, but I feel like ITDR is sort of the evolution of what UBA and what EBA was maybe a decade ago. It was this whole idea of collecting signals and then doing behavior analysis and cool identity things. But I feel like UBA of 10 years ago was a little bit ahead of its time because there weren't automation things in place yet for a lot of organizations. People were still discovering IGA. People were still discovering the basics of PAM, right? Things like that. Now, I feel like we're, about 10 years later, a lot of organizations have kind of cracked that. And now they actually have the tools to take advantage of that ITDR functionality to say, oh, okay, if you detect this signal, this threat, go do something about it rather than just tell somebody about it.
Exactly.
I kind of feel like that's the promise of ITDR, and the ability to execute is what's really going to come down to. I think it's having its day in the sun, and that day in the sun will continue as long as that reality gets met and it becomes more platforms that are included and gets better at detecting those things that are happening at that layer 7 rather than layer 3 of the OSI model. So I'm very hot on it right now. And in terms of whether or not it's part of a privileged access management strategy, I think absolutely. If you're able to detect a breach while it's happening and take make a response, in other words, disable an account or do something that will thwart that event, I mean, what better tool can you have? So
definitely.
ITDR was one.
I think it too, in terms of, I'll just say another thing about ITDR, which is cool, is it's putting identity at the forefront there, right? Where UEBA maybe wasn't so much, it was very much joined at the hip with your SIM tool, right? And kind of general, information event management, and it was meant really to cut the noise of all the different alerts you get in your SIM tool. That's really what the value prop was. And so I think it's great that the identity piece has been kind of highlighted, because identity is actually, as we've been hearing, is key to a good security posture, right? So definitely, I think ITDR is an important thing. Whether it's going to remain kind of its own thing or be part of a larger ecosystem of components, who knows? Yeah.
Okay. So I'm going to change the format of the question because now I want to shift because I really didn't want you to say no to ITDR. All right.
Okay.
That was my motivation. But now I want you to tell me whether or not you think these things are privileged access management or they are something completely different. And I'm going to go to that example of Kim that you brought up earlier, cloud infrastructure entitlement management. PAM or not PAM?
I think it is PAM because most of those cloud infrastructure entitlements are privilege entitlements. So I think fundamentally that is PAM. But actually, when we named this, we said entitlement management. So it sounds like IGA, right? So it's you can go either way on this, but given it's privileged, I think it's important that with privileged access, it's all about identifying the privileged accounts, making sure that the right people have access to those accounts or not, and be able to identify if those accounts are being used properly or compromised, right? So I think Kim addresses some of those things.
So I look at it like I'm taking a test. Cloud infrastructure entitlement management. Cloud infrastructure entitlements. Who's going to have cloud infrastructure entitlements? Probably an admin of some sort. So I'm in the PAM camp as well. Cloud infrastructure entitlement leads me to believe like we're talking to Azure admin, AWS admins, GCP admins, X cloud, whatever we're calling it, and admins. So that's the way I look at it. So I'm looking at it like from a test taking perspective, as the nerd I am.
Yeah,
it's cloud infrastructure, and the entitlements that go with that. PAM. Final answer.
Yeah, no, I'm good with that answer as well. Let's move to the next one. DevOps Secrets Vault. And bonus question to this, or 1A is, okay, DevOps Secrets Vault, and is there differentiation between different secrets vaults, or is whatever suite you're running, you just use that?
Yeah, a secrets vault. Secrets are really privileged. They're almost the same as privileged accounts, right? They're just kind of the cloud version, right? Or the, probably more in the context of your Kubernetes and different cloud native technologies that use secrets, right? So I definitely think that's part of PAM, although, PAM tools had not traditionally done a good job managing those secrets, but I think they've come a long way now, to being able to do that. So yeah, those are privileged accounts. And so therefore those must be protected just like your other, passwords and credentials in your password vault, so to speak.
Okay. Endpoint privilege management, which I guess is kind of built into the name, but what we're talking about here is managing administrative access to your laptops and desktops. Is that PAM or is that desktop management or something else?
Yeah. And again, I think you think about it either from the people process part of it. You may not have your PAM person or group managing your desktop, privileges, but I do still think that it is privilege access because in many cases you have your built-in administrator account in your laptop. And so endpoint privilege management tools, what they do is they manage those credentials. They allow you to kind of just in time, elevate your non-privileged account to a privileged account so you could do something on your machine. So definitely those. And actually, my experience has been that this is a real hot item for compliance for CISOs and those who are worried about breaches because where do breaches start? At the endpoint. And a privileged account on an endpoint can easily be traversed and, assume the privileges of other, possibly server level accounts. So
yeah, it's definitely an expensive problem to solve. What do you think, Jeff?
Well, it's admin privileges again. We're talking about like, why wouldn't?
Yep.
We're talking about ransomware, and if you've got admin privileges on your machine, guess what? You can install whatever you want and cause no problems. Most organizations probably want to shut that down. So yeah, you want admins to control that sort of thing. So again, PAM, final answer.
Okay, so it seems like Jeff, your dividing line is admin. It's PAM, not admin. We'll see. And when I say we'll see, brings me right to my last one. Social media account management. So in other words, you are a big sports league or a big, I don't know, media company or something like that. You've got Twitter accounts, you got Facebook accounts, Instagram accounts, yada, yada, yada. How do you manage those? How do you make it so that those don't fall in? I mean, you could probably do just as much damage to a company like that with their Twitter account as you could if you got certain types of admin accounts. So, social media account management, PAM or not PAM?
I think it's PAM. I think so. I mean, now I'm thinking of it as a general term, right? So whether it's be part of a PAM tool or, I mean, that's a whole other debate, right? It's who's, maybe there's specialized tools that are more business friendly to safeguard those accounts, or maybe that could be on a, platform by platform basis. Maybe Twitter might have a certain kind of cool admin way to protect those. But yeah, I agree. I think those accounts in the wrong hands can damage a company's reputation, right? So those are privileged accounts, in my opinion.
Jeff.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, absolutely. I've been thinking PAM has applied for social media accounts for years now. I'm not hesitant to say that. I feel like, I've been saying this for about 5 years now, talking with companies that we work with and say, hey, what are you doing about your social media accounts? I wouldn't even qualify it for, if your company is public facing and sports leagues and things like that. Any company, if you have an online presence and and you have people who have access to your social media accounts that can do damage to your brand, that is privileged access. You might not be an administrator in the in the traditional sense of like infrastructure, but you're probably an administrator of your social media service, LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, X, whatever it's called now. By the time you listen to this, right? Things like that, is you're still an administrator. And I feel like brand reputation damage should absolutely be at the forethought of people thinking about this. And I feel like this is an area where PAM vendors have absolutely failed. I don't know one out there that has actually thought about social media accounts and how we're going to protect them as part of their overall solution. They might have a partnership or something like that, but I'll call out, a CyberArk, a Delinea, a Beyond Trust. Where are their privileged access management capabilities for social media accounts? I don't think they exist. I'm happy to be wrong. If I am, tell me, but I haven't seen it yet. I feel like that's an untapped area that really needs a lot of exploring and figuring out, especially as organizations move more into the cloud and take advantage of things like that to promote their brand or even provide services. I mean, you can go to the Delta app and use chat message, right, to get help. How good the help is a totally different story, but there's lots of ways to communicate with, companies online. And I feel like social media is just, it's like the Mariana Trench. It hasn't been explored yet.
Yeah. I mean, that's actually the point that I was going to make. I do think that, and I do think it's somewhat dependent on the type of company. Like if you're a chemical company or something like that, a smaller company that, not every company, the brand is important, but if your social media account got hacked, it might not even make the nightly news. Like nobody might even care that someone put out some stupid tweet about like some chemical company. I use that as an example. It's not to disparage chemical companies, but it's a lot different than if you're the New York Times or you're the National Hockey League or something like that, right? Those ones where, people really keep their eye on. You're shaking your head. No, you don't agree.
I disagree. I totally disagree. I mean, I think those are important too, but I think there's actually more damage the smaller the company compared to the larger. What do people do? You go on Google Maps and you're looking for an electrician, a plumber, a restaurant. If someone messes up your small business profile there because somebody posted something stupid, you have such a small pool of available customers and such small reach. I think the damage there is outsized compared to a large organization that has tons of media contacts, tons of money to kind of throw at the problem to fix their PR. If you're a small restaurant and somebody writes, I don't know, we cook, I don't know, some endangered animal and serve that as meat, people are going to latch onto that. And
so
you don't have the resources. Yeah. I mean, I think it's outsized stripped the other way. Like I would be a lot more focused if I was a smaller organization that is much more dependent on brand loyalty, brand recognition, and positive images that way. Because I feel like you can solve a lot of things with money. The bigger the company, the more money they can throw at the problem. Hey, we talked about Comcast. Comcast sucked forever. What did they do? Oh, we just changed our name to Xfinity. It's still the same service. They just did a rebranding. Smaller organization, smaller company, small business, they don't have those kinds of resources to do that. So I'm shaking my head here like, no, I feel the opposite. But that's my soapbox.
So everyone's got both sides of the argument now. What I was getting at, though, is I definitely think there should be a policy, but there's still that technological hurdle, right? You're not going to have a traditional privilege access management tool, CyberArk, a Delinea, BeyondTrust, do social media account management. If anybody out there disagrees with me, we've got a voicemail channel. We've got a way to contact us by email. Feel free to hit us up on LinkedIn. But as far as I'm concerned, it's an area that I don't think anybody's solving in this privilege access management space per se. I know we've had folks on in the past talk about a social media platform tool, but I wouldn't say it was like a mainline privilege access management solution. Okay.
Right.
Moving on from that topic.
Real quick,
ahead,
go
Paul.
into to Jeff's point. Yeah, probably a smaller business that would not be able to leverage, like a full-blown solution. So they'll likely have to do something like making sure to secure all their accounts with multi-factor authentication, other kind of protections to make sure that those accounts aren't easily compromised, right? So then maybe even resort to, if you have a shared account, using a password vault,
Yeah, I mean,
I cringe to say that, but there's ways that small companies can do to protect their online accounts.
Yeah, and chances they're probably not even thinking about it, right? They're more concentrated on their product or their service and things like that. And yeah, I mean, I'm not going to go to my local barbecue place, and I'm pretty sure they're not running CyberArk or SailPoint or any of this stuff, right? All they care about is getting the ribs out the door.
Yeah. When they email you, it will be a gmail.com account. All right. So I wanted to switch topics, Paul. Mutual friend of all of ours, friend of the show, Ian Glazer, recently posted something on the ID Pro Slack channel, which, by the way, got tons of traffic. I mean, I think there were 62 replies within a couple of days. But basically, the gist of it was he was pointing to a blog post that he inked, and we put a link in the show notes. But it was basically discussing zero standing privilege and least privilege. And that, I'm a direct quote of Ian's is least privilege is a lie. And maybe that's what started the firestorm, right? Because it's we've all been preaching least privilege for I don't know, I've been preaching it for 20 plus years. I didn't take offense to it personally because I think these kind of discussions are what make this industry interesting. How does that strike you?
Yeah, I mean, Ian's a brilliant communicator and a writer, so he did all the right things on this article around, putting a kind of little controversial, pithy statement there around, that it's least privilege is a lie. But, looking at the article, I mean, he definitely says that should not be our end goal. But obviously, entitlement management is probably here to stay in many cases. And so it's a matter of, maybe the new goal should be zero standing privilege, and maybe that should be our ultimate goal. That why not eliminate as much standing privilege as possible, right? So we kind of look at it from a one extreme would be over privilege on one side, and then zero standing privilege on the other. Maybe least privilege is somewhere in the middle, and so zero standing privilege is just an approach to get you to reduce the number of entitlements that are or accounts that could potentially be exposed, right? So if you could do it with zero standing privilege, it's great. I just don't know if it's how practical that is for some of the legacy systems that are out there that just require, standing accounts to, I mean, in the environment where I work, it's all on-prem. We have Active Directory, we have servers, Unix servers, Linux servers, Windows servers, Active Directory. Actually, all my domain admins are, I manage all that group. And, obviously we get reviews of, do you need that domain account? And, what can you do? And so the challenge sometimes is that these legacy solutions don't give you that delegated administration that's fine-grained enough that you could say, okay, I got this, department IT in the school of medicine or whatever in the university, and they need certain things because they got their own machines, and basically I can't delegate to that fine level of privilege, so I have to give them sometimes an account that's more privileged than what they need. So those things, and obviously we do. I have some guys that do a lot of programming to get around that, but it's not inherent in a lot of these tools. Of course, like in Azure, they got PIM, so we use that, and definitely you can, do zero standing privileges there. You can elevate an account for a set period of time. So yeah, definitely, I think, probably as we evolve to more cloud solutions, we'll be able to do zero standing privilege.
All right,
but I just think that it's, it's a lofty goal, but it's going to be a while before we all get there.
I want to bounce this to Jeff because I want to throw it to Jeff. Is least privilege a lie?
I don't think it's a lie. I think it's, how do I describe this? So it's the difference between a horse and buggy and a car that you're driving down the street. Least privilege was what you could do with the available technology that you had at the time. Meaning, we don't have automation. The only way you get to zero standing privilege is if you have a supreme amount of automation in your environment. You're data driven, you are attribute based, access control driven to say, hey, I need this specific entitlement at this specific time because I have this specific piece of data that tells me to do that. The vast majority of corporations and organizations out in the world do not have that level of maturity when it comes to identity. So what is your fallback plan? Well, it's roles. Well, in case you need access. Okay, so now we go back to the technology didn't exist. We didn't have the combustion engine, so we all rode horses, right? Before that was we walked, right? And then the wheel got invented, right? And things like that. I think it's the same concept. So I don't think it's a lie. I think it's just a description of where you're at from a technology standpoint. That's how I see it.
Well, no, I think that's a good point. I also feel like if you're going to do zero standing privileges, in other words, just-in-time provisioning of access, you want to just-in-time provision the least privilege that's required to do the job. It's not like, oh, I need to go out and add a printer to the print server. I'd like to check out global admin. That's not necessary, right? And I know I'm creating like this totally outrageous example, but I think you want to add a printer, and we should give you printer administrator rights or something, right? So, and then the other thing I think is that, zero standing privileges, philosophically speaking, is the way to go. But, from an implementation standpoint, you're not just going to flip a switch and take your thousands of entitlements and get it all to zero standing. And, I think what is realistic is to pick out the high risk situations, high risk use cases, and go after those. But, if anything that we're saying, Ian's out there listening and is like screaming at his cell phone or whatever he's listening on,
Bring
come
it,
back
Ian,
on
bring
the
it.
show. We'd love to have this conversation a little bit further. I sparked up a debate on ID Pro Slack one time too, where I brought up the whole topic of, do you need to have secondary admin accounts? So specifically using the example of Active Directory, should people have administrative access using their everyday account, or should they, in all cases, have a secondary admin account for doing, when I say all cases, for doing administrative work? I feel like they should have a secondary account for doing all administrative work, because I think the traditional argument has been, well, you're probably not going to get phished for your admin credentials. Like, we all like to think phishing is for other people. Phishing is going to be the dumb person who can't see through these emails. But the reality is like, we all have our dumb moments. And so the idea would be that if you did get phished on your everyday account, you would use your everyday account credentials. So that's number one. I think number two is that the admin accounts you can put in a separate OU and then isolate them from lower level users being able to change the credentials. So here's the scenario I'm talking about is, say you had an administrative access on your everyday account and you were in the same OU as the help desk, and the help desk could go in, change your password, eliminate your multi-factor authentication, then go and reset your account or go and log in to your account. Now they're an administrator. So they've gone from someone that you give them this much trust to someone who now can run the entire domain and take over your organization. So if you're not thinking about those kind of like takeover kind of paths, I think you're doing yourself a disservice. So to me, secondary accounts in a separate OU that people outside of that OU can't touch those accounts. What do you think, Paul?
Yeah, I mean, I think the default is a secondary account. I mean, you look at even ISO 27001. I mean, you look at all the frameworks, and that's like a de facto, policy that you can't have your daily use account to be an administrative account. So, I agree with you that it has to be a separate one, and especially if, depending on where you are in the maturity spectrum in PAM. I mean, you could, if you're able to elevate your account or use PAM tool, which then that PAM tool hopefully does have the privileges to do whatever you want it to do, but you directly don't. So that's another way to do it. So you really don't even need a secondary account. That's all managed by your PAM tool, right? So, there's different ways around it, but I think it depends on the IT environment you have is what you have to do. But definitely, you never want to just be doing your email and your account is an administrative account, and that's going back to the endpoint privilege management. Some folks are by default administrators of their Windows laptop, which is almost the same thing that you're talking about. It's you're really exposing yourself there.
Jeff, I disagree. I absolutely disagree because I'm the contrarian in this one. I think so. Here's how we stop the proliferation of privileged access management. Just give it to everybody. Everybody's an admin. Now you're not special anymore, and you don't have to worry about it.
There you go. Just legalize everything, and everyone will stop.
Exactly. Right. If everybody's an admin, nobody's special. Yeah.
So before we move on from this topic of privileged access management, Paul, do you see anything in the future? I mean, you have a crystal ball, right?
Oh, yeah, got it right here. What I see is that as we are using AI for a lot of things, right, we're able to automate a lot of tasks. We're able to even automate a lot of at some point some IAM functions. I think privileged access is going to be even more important than ever, and that there's going to be a lot more accounts probably that will become privileged. So I'd say the scope of privilege access is going to expand. It's not just your server and admin geeks, in the closet, in the computer room, doing their thing, having potato chips and a Coke or whatever. It's going to be your, maybe a chief marketing officer, other folks, that are doing privilege access, and also, it's going to be more difficult to know if this is a real person or if this is an impersonation of somebody through AI, so I think it's going to be really important that we kind of understand how do we authenticate or prove authenticity of a person, that it is a person versus a machine, so I think that's going to be a real big challenge, I think, going forward. And I don't know if it's really particularly in the context of PAM, but I think it's going to be a general problem around any kind of access, right?
Yeah, not only how do you prove who you are, how do you prove who you're not? I think it's another area.
Yeah,
that's a whole other show, I think, to get into.
Yeah.
I feel like we've beat up PAM pretty good at this point, which is a terrible thing to say. And please don't isolate that and put that anywhere. But let's talk about IGA, because last time we checked in with you, we were kind of talking through that. You spent some time with Saviynt. You've got a lot of experience really in this space. I guess, where do you see kind of the current state of IGA right now from market perspective, because Gartner has called it done, in my mind, for a couple of years now. I think 2019 was the last Magic Quadrant. We asked Henrique and Becky on stage when we were at Gartner last year, who won, what was the plan there. But I still see a lot of IGA vendors starting to come up again, trying to be disruptive. And we've had several of them on our show. What's the state of the IGA market from your perspective?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're going to have your leaders always, that we have today that are continuing to innovate and add, bells and whistles and functionality to their current platform. And then you're going to have these point solutions, these innovators that are going to approach things in a different way. I think, the generative AI and maybe natural language type solutions where things are just, because I still think IGA is very complicated, for most people. It's very complicated to implement. It's not necessarily IGA's fault, but because integrating with sources of truth and provisioning to systems, I mean, it's not an easy thing. But of course, we need to simplify it, and we need to streamline it and make the learning curve a little, improve that learning curve, no matter what solution you go with, right? So perhaps with AI and that we are able to make it easier for somebody to get up to speed on a particular solution and maybe even help, given that all these platforms are SaaS and, they're seeing all the different entitlements and transactions occurring across all their tenants. I'm sure that there's some intelligence that can be built there to help new customers with, say, higher ed, say they got, 5 universities on their platform. Well, the 6th one should be much easier for them because now they've said, okay, well, we see these other universities that are doing it this way, and it's hopefully going to help streamline the onboarding and configuration of the IGA tools. So I think automation is definitely going to be a big part of it.
Is that the real innovation that's taking place now? Is it just it's getting easier to deploy these things? It's getting easier to leverage the tools? Because I feel like that's still the innovation point. We've already solved, you need to connect a whole bunch of stuff together, right? And then use some sort of voodoo magic to figure out, this is Paul on this system and Paul on that other system. But it's historically been a complex process to get that integrated and set up and configured and workflows and all the other stuff. Is the innovation point just making those things easier to do?
I think it's definitely one of them, and, as you said, maybe not even 10 years ago, we were still having to install these different servers and IGA tools on-prem, and the complexity of that was, and PAM solutions as well. Don't want to leave them out. And so at least with the SaaS, solutions now, you don't have to worry about all that configuration. They basically spin up a tenant for you and you configure things with a, point and click, and it's much easier from that perspective. So I think at least that part of the complexity has been removed. But in terms of, possibly the way that the user experience has been on some of these solutions, to me seems still a little bit not streamlined for the typical user. And as we know, as I mentioned earlier, more and more people, because the more you could delegate and push these business processes to your business, the better, right? So you want your business unit to manage all the entitlements for their people, and none of them are technical usually. So the easier to make it for them, they're the best people to do that work, right? And I just think that maybe there'll be some innovation in the user experience that could be incorporated into these IGA tools. I'd say that would be awesome if we could do that.
Yeah, anything that makes it easier, I think, for everybody is always a great win. I want to pivot the conversation towards your higher ed experience, because I feel that's a underrated from a difficulty standpoint, that unless you've been in the space and tried to manage identity, and especially the more complex higher ed scenarios, that people may have a difficult time kind of understanding just how complex it could be. I guess, can you talk a little bit about your experience in the higher ed space? You've got a broad range of experience. How does higher ed compare to some of those other roles that you might have had? And is it about what you expected from a difficulty level? Is it easier? Is it harder? Are there things that's like, oh, I never really kind of had to deal with that before, and now you are in that higher ed space?
Yeah, I'd say it's definitely a lot harder. And, obviously, when I was in the financial industry and in the healthcare industry, um, so this is not my first gig. So I've had all that experience to kind of, as foundation. So I'm not totally surprised, around, IGA solutions and some of the typical problems and being able to streamline onboarding and deprovisioning and things like that. But I think the biggest challenge for the higher ed is all the different constituents that are out there. It's not just like an HR system or a vendor management system, but you have student information system. You have we have a common HR across all the UC system. We have a affiliate system, which is basically like a third party access, for non-employees. We have applicants. So we have students that are in various stages, right? So they're applicants. Well, what rights should they have as an applicant, right? Obviously, you don't want to show them their application until it's ready to, for them to know if they made it in or not, or maybe their grades, things like that. And then what about after the student leaves the university? Now they're an alumni. Well, what access should they get then? And then we have staff like myself, and then we have faculty. So faculty, they want to, have access to everything that they need to be, to cutting edge teacher. They want to be able to share all their information out on the internet with no restrictions at all. So there's that kind of that balance between, okay, the university wants to share and kind of go at lightning speed, but then obviously, we do have a CISO, we have an information team, security team that's also worried about, the things that you typically worry about. So there's that tension, and there's so many different constituents. There's also, privacy, for student privacy. So anything that we want to do for a student around their access, we have to talk with the registrar, the privacy officer, so just a lot of different constituents to manage. So I think it's not so much different from the other industries, but it's just more constituent management. And so I think that's why it's important to have an IAM program and have a real focus on building those relationships, so that you understand what their needs are, right?
And Paul, I could see a scenario where you mentioned like the professors just want to set something up without restrictions. And, you probably hear from people who are new to higher ed, who maybe are teaching a class, but come from business. And it's like, hey, the other place I work, I can just do this, that, and the other, bing, bada boom. And it's like, yeah, you don't understand all the complexity behind the scenes and why we can't do that. So totally resonates. The other thing, like I've worked with a lot of universities over time, helping them develop their identity strategy. And one of the things that I've seen with almost all the universities was like getting the ID card, getting set up, you had to go through some kind of identity verification process. And prior to COVID, it was a lot of times like you just show up, show your government issued ID, bada bing, bada boom, you're verified. And then you can get like a level 2 type of an account. I think with COVID and some of the advancements that have taken place with in the space, and in other words, technology advancements. Plus, even though I said a lot of people would show up on campus, it's always more complicated than that. Really big universities have satellite campuses in other countries, or they might have researchers in other places. So it wasn't always easy. Exactly, they always had to have something. But I guess what I'm getting at is it seems like identity verification, it would be a really hot use case in universities, and the ability to do kind of like a selfie match to a government ID seems like, that would be a perfect hit for higher ed. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, definitely with the, global kind of constituency, like you said, professors, researchers all over the world, they need access, students. But again, it's all about, what is it that, does that impinge on someone's privacy? So you have to go through the questions for each type of person, what is it that's acceptable to those constituents, as in terms of identity verification. But I do think, I mean, at some point, I would love to have something that's automated for onboarding even employees, right? And be able to, instead of having them to come and show their driver's license or passport or whatever, scan it in, fax it or whatever it might be. I'm not too familiar with that process, but I know it's probably, pretty outdated. So I definitely think that would be a great use case at some point. I mean, we're on a journey. We're just trying to get past going to a commercial IGA solution at this point, from a custom 30-year-old provisioning solution to something that's, much more modern, allow us
Grouper
to
involved. That's
Yeah.
what I discovered a while back working with one of the higher heads was this thing called Grouper. I was like, what is that?
I
Yeah.
used to love grouper sandwiches, but after my experience with grouper software, I was like, not so much.
I never heard of the grouper sandwiches.
Paul, you've been working on a lot of different things. I know we're hitting in an hour here, so
Okay,
kind of want to let you get on with your
Yes.
evening. But I
Yeah, you
guess
do.
with
It's
all the
late for
work,
you.
yeah, well, it's fine. What else am I going to do in New York City? At 8:30 p.m. I'm sure there's nothing else going on in the
You're
city.
ready to hit the streets.
in one way or another, perhaps. But you've got all these different things you've been working on. I guess what are some upcoming projects or things that you might be working on kind of next in your world?
Yeah, I mean, definitely. I'm going to be, I'm going to be joining Gartner actually, hopefully very soon. It's kind of hard the timing of it, but that's kind of my next venture is actually rejoining Gartner. I'll be at doing identity, of course, and working in a little bit different team than the team that I was in. But I'm really looking forward to that. So I was really excited about being able to stay in the vendor space, be in the in the kind of the space where you're looking at new technologies and such. And so I'm excited that I'm going to be joining Gartner, and I would love for folks that are listening to reach out, on LinkedIn, and obviously that'll be able to post comments and things. I'd love to get your input in general, because I know that in the past when I was at Gartner, input from folks, from conference attendees or just people that I talked to was so valuable in making your research and your presentations and all that better, right? So I'm looking forward to this audience to be able to connect with me.
Well, that's exciting. And now I guess that's why we're recording this on a Friday night and getting it out on a Thursday or Friday the following week, because, once you go into the Gartner thing, right, we wouldn't be able to have you on the show basically. So that's kind of why we're doing this special episode. So we kind of saved it till the very end, but it's very exciting. I think, if you're not following Paul on LinkedIn already, one, you should be, but there's a lot of good information that comes out from there. And, I'm looking forward to seeing the stuff that you produce and publish, and, bending your ear on things and meeting up at conferences and things like that. So that's really exciting. I'm very happy for you. And, it's another good get for the Gartner team. So, folks that can really
don't
get
forget
are awesome over there, as well as others.
Yeah.
Congratulations, Paul. And don't forget the little people when you're over at Gartner.
Yeah. When can we expect the Magic Quadrant for Identity and Access Management podcasts? And how
that'd be
far
great.
to the up and right would we be?
Well, yeah, you would definitely be number one, I would think.
Yeah, I mean, we
Way
were
up on the
fortunate.
top upper corner, But then the caveat is we always say that, don't always pick the ones on the upper right, look at the other ones.
Right.
But when it
We
comes
also
to
share the
identity at the
love.
center,
I mean, we're called Identity at the Center. Like, should we be in the middle, or
Upper
maybe there's
right,
a
all the
maybe
way-
it's not a Magic Quadrant anymore. Maybe it's like some kind of a weird Venn diagram. You get Eve involved. She likes in Venn diagrams.
There you
Maybe
go.
we can work with that.
There you go.
That's really exciting, Paul. So I'm glad we're
thank
able
you.
to get this in and sort of an off cycle thing, but we're happy to do it and get you back on, before we couldn't. So,
Yeah, no, I really appreciate it. I really do. And, I enjoy your podcast. I listen to probably every episode and get a lot out of it. love the vendor reviews, love the conversations with folks. So keep up the good work, guys. Definitely.
We'll definitely appreciate that.
Thanks.
And you know how we close our shows. We end on a lighter note. We're going to go completely off base here and talk about travel real quick. So here's this week's question, or this episode's question, I guess I should say. What is the most interesting place that you've traveled to, and why did it leave such an impression on you?
Yeah, I had the good fortune of recently going to Europe. So I flew into France, got a chance to check out the Mona Lisa and a couple of things, and trained over to Italy and went on a cruise. It was just like my kind of dream vacation. And I think what I appreciated the most is really the Rome, and going to the Vatican and seeing all the history and the wonderful works of art and just the history that's there in Europe. It's not like, United States, but I mean, it just goes back thousands of years. So you just kind of get blown away by everything that you see. Right. And so that to me was probably my most favorite and exciting vacation that I've had so
That does
far.
sound like a good time for sure.
Yeah.
Jim, how about yourself? What's the most interesting place you've traveled to, and why did it leave an impression?
So I traveled to Seoul, South Korea. It was probably about 10 years ago, and I was there on business. And the impression part. So first off, beautiful country, very modern, more modern than I was expecting, and more modern in some ways than we have things in the United States. And I know we have listeners from all over the world, right? So I don't want this to be too US centric of an answer. But for me, it was like, it was, I think it was a 12-hour time difference from home. And so I was just like tired all during the day, and I couldn't sleep at night. And I think I was getting like 2-3 hours of sleep per night. So that starts to wear on you after a few days. And I was starting to feel like anxious. And this one memory that I have, I was sitting in a Starbucks, and I remember somebody who I knew from, part of my company, so they spoke very good English, was telling me, oh yeah, about a year ago, the North Koreans were digging a tunnel towards Seoul. And I think Seoul is in northern South Korea, right? It's not that far from the DMZ, etc. But the North Koreans were building a tunnel into South Korea, and they were going to invade South Korea. And I was like, that is not what I needed to hear. So I was jacked up on caffeine. I was getting like 2 hours of sleep a night. I'm like, okay, now I'm a nervous wreck.
I can see why that would leave an impression on you. That's for sure. The thought of North Korea popping up into the bed of your hotel, like a movie or something like that.
Yeah, not a good movie. Not a good movie to be in.
Fun fact is we actually have at least one listener in North Korea based on the metrics that I've seen. So, hey,
cool.
If you're listening there, maybe that was them. Maybe they're just trying to, spread the gospel of identity. I don't know. Let's see.
They wanted to meet Jim in person, maybe.
Yeah, well, it could be the Paul Mezzera of North Korea.
Let's see. For me, I think, I've been fortunate to travel a little bit, not too much internationally, but I think probably my first big international trip going to India. I went to India for like 2 weeks to do some training for a team that was out there for identity operations and things like that. And it was my first time kind of really leaving the United States. And I was probably late 20s, early 30s, I guess, in that area. And, I'd been to like Canada, stuff like that. Kind of didn't really count. But, this was, oh my gosh, I'm getting on a flight and going literally around the world to another country. And it was awesome. I enjoyed it. I was very fortunate to have like good hosts that were kind of making sure that, one, I didn't, disrespect anything from a culture standpoint, right? That was, stay on the up and up on that side, but just the blitz on the senses there. The first time you kind of go to someplace like that and you've lived in the US the whole time, the food, the sights, the sounds, the traffic, the driving, all kinds of stuff. It was such a fun trip. I'll never forget it. It's definitely one of the favorite things, but going to India, and specifically I was in Chennai, which is in the southern tip, kind of on the east side of the Bay of Bengal over there. And, Jim, how much I love heat and humidity. And this is like the worst that I've ever been in. 120 degrees, and like 400% humidity. And it was just not my ideal scenario, but I had such a good time and people were so friendly and the culture was just amazing. So that's probably it was just the most impressionable kind of like, you get out there and say, okay, yeah, there's more to the world than just kind of what we see here in the US. And, your ranch dressing is the most important thing in the world.
Did you get to fly business?
Did. That definitely helps. Yeah, I won't fly more than 5 or 6 hours without I just can't do it. I'm too old now at this point. Neck, back issues. I can't sleep on planes anyway, but yeah, we got business class and we had a nice plane coming back actually. It was ANA, which I think is a Japanese airline, if I remember. And it was like super high tech and lie flat. We had like huge TVs. It was awesome. And of course I didn't pay for it. So that made it even better.
Yeah.
But I didn't sleep on planes. I don't sleep on planes.
Were they like because I just figure since I'm going, I'm going to, spend the money for a nice business class myself. And the United, I'd never been on a business class since a long time for, business travel, but how does it compare to the United seats, that particular airline? I kind of like these, but they seemed a little on the narrow felt a little claustrophobic, even though I could recline all the way down and had my own TV and a little armrest, but it was still a little bit claustrophobic for me.
It is, but look, it's still better than sitting back and coach.
Yeah. Oh, of course.
I mean, we're talking first world problems at this point. So I was actually it wasn't a United flight. It was, it was like Star Alliance or whatever. It's like United and ANA and stuff like that. But I thought they were pretty much the same, but I remember the service was much better from like a service on a flight perspective. And it was just a newer plane and, kind of got lucky. I don't know if I got lucky or not, but it seems like every flight that I fly in Delta these days is like some 40-year-old plane that half the stuff doesn't work. It's not a premium product. I'm sorry to tell you, Ed over at Delta. It is, it's just fine. It's average, nothing great. But that's the one thing I think international airlines seem to have, at least the mainstream ones seem to have better service, better planes and things like that.
Do you guys ever watch like travel vloggers on YouTube? I mean, you can see like all the different, that's one of my rabbit holes that I go down and like watch, all the first class flights and all the first class sleeper trains and things like that. But what made me think of all of this also was, Jeff, you brought up Japan, and like so many people go to Japan, they stay in they have these pod hotels. So basically you don't get a whole hotel room, you just get like a little like pod. I don't know how to describe it except that
that's what it is. It's like a little cubicle thing.
Yeah. It's like a little cubicle thing with just a bed. And there's somebody who has one right above you and to both sides of you. And, everything is, but it's all like super modern. I just always think when I'm watching it, like, Jeff would love this.
I would love to go to Japan. Japan is bucket list for me. I've only been to, Takeda Airport and a bus from Takeda to Haneda in the middle of the night because I missed my connection. Thanks, United. That's flying out there. So that's a story I've told before, but basically, sleeping in the Haneda Airport outside of a Hello Kitty store, blasting Hello Kitty music for like 8 hours waiting for my next flight. I would love to go to Japan. We need to find like some client or something that will take us out there because it's expensive to get out there.
Or maybe Identity Week will be in Tokyo one year, and
there you go.
Who knows? Maybe we can do that.
Yeah, use those discount codes. Show support.
There you go.
Go to the conferences and show that we can draw a crowd. Maybe we'll get out there someday. That'd be awesome. All right, we're at an hour 10. I think we're getting close to setting a record here. Paul, thank you so much for being part of this. I'm glad we were able to squeeze you in before the warm embrace of Gartner gets around you. Thank you for sharing your knowledge with us. Definitely, if you're not following Paul on LinkedIn, you should be. We'll see, hopefully, you later this year at the Gartner IAM conference as well. I think that one's going to be in Grapevine, Texas again. I think it's the first week of December, if I remember.
Yep.
So we'll probably see you there. And let's see what else. Use our discount codes. We'll have a bunch of links in our show notes for both the Identiverse as well as the Identity Week America conferences. We're on the web, idacpodcast.com, at IDAC Podcast on Twitter or X, or whatever it's called by the time you listen to this. Mastodon at IDAC podcast at InfoSec.exchange. Tons of Friday night. I'm ready to go. And then we'll have links in our show notes, right? For us on LinkedIn, for Paul on LinkedIn. Yeah, that's it. So party time, New York City. Here I come. No, I'm just kidding.
Get a slice of pizza.
I'm going to start editing the show. That's my fun, exciting New York City trip. But yeah, thanks everyone for listening. Paul, thanks again for joining us. Congratulations again. Don't be a stranger.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
All right. Thanks everybody. We'll talk to you all in the next one.
You've been listening to Identity at the Center. We hope you've enjoyed the show. Make sure to like, rate, and review. And we'll be back soon. But in the meantime, hit the website at identityatthecenter.com and find us on Twitter at IDAC Podcast. See you next time on Identity at the Center.